Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of the people. Hi, John.
Hello, sir. How you going?
Yeah, pretty good. You?
Not too bad this week.
Right. So we're going to have a bit of an update on the cash ban because there was some news put out last week, and we don't want people to be over enthusiastic about that news.
Indeed, indeed. So you hosted a show with Robbie Barwick on Walk the World, and the Citizens Party has been going around stating that we have declared victory on the cash ban, and that the government is not going to pursue this, and everything's okay. So, and because of that, some of those broadcasts, I mean, I've received a number of emails and text messages from people across the country who have said, congratulations, all your effort has been, we've been vindicated. So the most important thing I want to communicate to our audience is to say that the declaration of victory last week was premature. The government has not officially said they're going to not pursue the cash ban. What happened at the beginning of last week was that there was a series of text messages flying around, and I received some messages, and the Citizens Party also received some of the same messages. And what we had heard was that a lobbyist in Canberra was on a conference call with some ministerial advisors, and the cash ban came up in the conversation, and the lobbyist was told that the government was not going to pursue the cash ban going forward. So that's where the source of the information came from that gave, I think, Robbie and the Citizens Party confidence to say that we won and that it's all over. Having worked in Parliament and having worked in federal politics, what I've sort of come to learn is that when you hear stuff from staff or advisors, that's not the same as coming from the mouth of the minister or the mouth of the prime minister. So for me, you hear rumours all the time. I mean, every 5 seconds in Canberra, there's a new rumour. 95% of these rumours are always false. And so I've learnt through bitter experience in some cases not to accept rumours on face value. So for me, I think until we hear a clear and categorical statement from the Prime Minister, the Treasurer or the Assistant Treasurer that this cash transaction ban is not proceeding, I think it's safe to assume that this is still government policy, and that once the COVID-19 the COVID-19 lockdown, once that sort of, once the economy is unlocked and things get back to normal, the government, from everything I can see at this stage, they are going to come back to this issue. And we obviously need to remain vigilant as we go into the second half of 2020.
Yeah, and I guess it's worth saying a few things, John. Firstly, of course, the pressure from the public and, has been huge. And, of course, the ban would have come in had it not been for that. So, it shows that public pressure and all of the petitioning and everything else that was done has had a significant effect. And we also know that quite a few people in the Canberra brigade, as it were, know that this is a big deal. And so, the pressure has made a difference. The second is, of course, there are multiple ways to kill things off in politics. I'm always reminded of Yes Minister, which I think is the best documentary series ever done on the way that politics works. And of course, sometimes they come out and say, no, we're not going to do this. But they can also just not mention it, and it sort of die a quiet death somewhere over there. Now, that's a less formal and less official way. I think Robbie's view was that, they probably will just let it die. The fact is, we don't know. The fact is that it is still there in the background. And so you're quite right that we need to keep the pressure on, and we need to be very alert and vigilant lest they do try some way to slip it back. For example, saying, well, of course, it's to do with COVID-19 and, you can't use notes because if you use notes, you transfer, the virus. So all of those sorts of things, that's a risk. And I think you're right. We have to be very vigilant. But I also think that we can say that all that pressure, all of that intent from lots of viewers, both on this channel, DFA, and on the CC and elsewhere, had actually made a huge difference.
Yes, yes. So I mean, on that point, okay, so I think we can all agree that without the pressure, we would not have had the inquiry, and I think the inquiry was useful in fleshing out a number of issues. So I think we've had a positive impact. But the other thing that why I thought today's show was important is that there was a article that was published by the ABC, and this was Nassim Kadem, and Nassim has been at the forefront of reporting for the ABC on the cash ban, and the title of the article is "Coronavirus Sparks Large Bank Withdrawals Despite Looming Cash Transaction Ban," so there's a particular quote, and so. What I can sort of reveal for our audience is, so Nassim did call me last week, and sort of we've been in regular contact about the government's intentions on this piece of legislation. So I had told her I had heard rumors that the government was going to drop there was rumors that the government was going to drop the cash ban, but nothing had been confirmed. So therefore, in my mind, it's still on the table. So Nassim, as part of her reporting, she went to the minister, Minister Sukkar, and asked the question, "What are you doing about this particular piece of legislation?" And so if we can bring the quote on the screen. So there's a particular paragraph from her piece, and the quote goes, quote, Assistant Treasurer Michael Sukkar told ABC News the government was considering the Senate inquiry report recommendations while it dealt with the economic fallout of COVID-19. So there was an opportunity for the minister to walk back from the legislation or to say we've moved on, or to give some sort of excuse, but basically the minister didn't do anything, didn't sort of walk back in terms of the legislation, and I think this quote is important, Martin, in the context of what happened yesterday. So when the Prime Minister spoke at the National Press Club, and he mentioned categorically that the Ensuring Integrity Bill, which is this union reform bill, he said that he was dropping it because he wants to pursue other matters on industrial relations. Because there is a school of thought that the government doesn't want to say that they're going to drop this legislation because they don't want to be embarrassed. Well, what I think we saw from the Prime Minister yesterday is a willingness to be quite honest and say if the government's not going to pursue legislation going forward, they will actually say, they will say, we're pursuing this bill. Now we're no longer pursuing, in terms of the whatever the legislation may be. So I don't think there's any, I don't think Morrison would be embarrassed if he changed his mind on this bill and he wanted to drop the cash ban. I don't think Morrison would be embarrassed to be able to say that publicly. So I think that school of thought is quite fallacious, and the fact that again that Minister Sukkar told the ABC that they're still considering the report recommendations, and obviously the report recommendations. What they said was to enact a series of changes, and assuming those changes were implemented in the bill and in the regulation, that the Parliament and the Senate should pass the bill. So that is the position of the committee, and Sukkar is basically saying, well, once we deal with the COVID-19 and the lockdown, we will get back to this report. So at some stage, I'm hoping to put a few calls into people in the government, and maybe if required, go down to Canberra myself and knock on some doors and find out, well, what exactly is the government's response to the report recommendations. So that's where we're sitting. And the other, I guess, important point that I should note is that when we look at monetary policy, so obviously in March we saw huge amounts of monetary stimulus coming forward from central banks around the world, including our central bank. And what we've heard is that the cycle of monetary policy easing hasn't come to an end. Even though we've seen a huge amount of monetary stimulus, central banks are saying that they need to inject more. And in that context, in the last fortnight, we've seen the Bank of England as well as the Central Bank of New Zealand both say that they are openly now considering negative interest rates in terms of the next stage of where they want to take monetary policy. The RBA governor and the Canadian the governor of the Canadian Central Bank have said in the last fortnight that they think that that negative interest rates is not the right way to go. But one of the magical things about politics and central bank statements is that they can easily change their mind within a few weeks when they say, that they categorically rule something out.
Yeah, and Jerome Powell, of course, also said that they weren't considering negative interest rates in the US. They thought about it, but not considered it. But remember that the Fed is owned by the private banks in the US, and essentially the Fed is going to stand up for bank profitability, because everybody knows that negative interest rates undermine bank profitability. So there's another set of motives that people need to understand, and I think there's going to be more downward pressure on rates, and I think probably the Japanese model of where we get to is probably quite close to where we're going to get to, which would suggest that negative rates will at some point emerge here.
Yes, and we've discussed this on several occasions already, but all of this has been well documented in the IMF technical papers. That if you're going to have negative interest rates, you have to either severely curtail or you need to eliminate cash. So I think this is not a short-term game. This is a long-term game. Negative rates may not be on the table in 2020 for the RBA, but if we continue to see economic weakness in 2021, 2022, I would not be surprised for negative interest rates to come forward. And obviously, the cash ban, from a sequence perspective, should come in before negative rates come in. So there's been nothing that I have seen on the monetary policy front that says that the government is walking away from where we think they're headed, and again, people shouldn't be complacent, and what we have seen in terms of this COVID-19 lockdown, particularly in Victoria, we've seen government overreach in terms of using its power to implement the lockdown, a whole huge of issues around civil rights and the ability to protest and a few other things. And so there's definitely an economic argument to be had about the ability to escape the banking system and to preserve your wealth. But then there's obviously a question of freedom and civil rights, and maybe you have a different view, Martin, but I think the last 2 months we've seen the real intent of some of these politicians, both at the federal and state level, about their commitment to civil rights in this country.
Yeah, well, no, I agree with you, John, that, and I keep saying this, civil rights are hard won, and it takes a long time to essentially have freedoms. It's often easier for them to be taken away, and we've seen that over the last 4 or 5 years in Australia, whether it's security based, whether it's freedom of movement and all those things. It's almost like every time we look around, we've lost another bit, and unfortunately that program of transformation, I think, is not just happenstance. There is some thought and some plan behind it. And unfortunately, it takes us into a society that is less open, less free, less able to say what it thinks, and under greater control. And that worries me, because I think Australia should be a place of openness and freedom, and a willingness to exchange ideas and to be able to do what you want to do. Unfortunately, the shape of this society is going in the wrong direction, I think.
Totally. One question I wouldn't mind just asking you, Martin, before we wrap up today's show is, so a lot of the civil rights that we have in Australia, a lot of them, when you said they were hard won by, a lot of them resulted in people in the UK, particularly in England, fighting the king or fighting the aristocracy and actually dying for some of these rights and common law to be established. When you grew up in England, did you get that strong sense, whether through schooling or through your parents, that in order to be free, that you had to some people historically had to pay the ultimate sacrifice, not only just in terms of foreign wars, and obviously England's been involved in foreign wars, for 500 years plus, but also fighting, in terms of the royal family.
Well, it's an interesting question, John. And yeah, there was, I was educated in the 60s and 70s, so it's a bit of a time ago now. But I can remember quite clearly, particularly through history and also through British Constitution, which was a particular subject I studied, how it was actually demonstrated that the freedoms that we have had in the UK was actually the product of hundreds of years of struggle and fight, and none of those freedoms were easily granted. They were all hard won. Many people, died in the process. Many people fought long and hard, whether you look at slavery, whether you look at votes for women, all of those things. All of the freedoms that were there in the 70s in the UK go back through history and emerged. And at that time, the sense was that the UK was an open, free, and democratic society. If you look at it today, with what Johnson has done in terms of actually imposing the controls and restrictions on the UK is going backwards. They've lost a lot of their freedoms too, and unfortunately, we seem to be following the same path. And it does seem to be moving back towards a more centralised, more controlling, more digitally determined future. And I think the digital world is actually, there's great positives about the digital world, but there's also massive risks about effectively losing the freedoms that we've been used to. And unfortunately, it's a bit like the old story of the frog in the frying pan, right? Who goes in cold, you turn the heat up, and the frog just stays there as the water warms slowly. You don't notice it changing, but actually it's very important to stand back and just think, what have we lost? And what are the risks that we lose more freedoms, and essentially we end up with less ability to be ourselves, and more of our future determined by some overt centralisation of power. That really concerns me, and unfortunately I don't think that many people here in Australia are really awake to the risks.
Yeah. So what I would say that in conclusion, in terms of myself, I'm still assuming that the government is going to bring this legislation forward in the second half of 2020. When I get accurate information that I'm confident that is solid from within government, I'm obviously happy to come back and share that with the audience. But in the interim, I think everyone needs to remain vigilant in terms of what the government's policy is, not only just in terms of cash, but in terms of monetary policy. We didn't hear anything new from the Prime Minister yesterday with his National Press Club address. Basically, it's more debt, it's more immigration, it's more trying to expand the property sector and trying to save that sector. So I think with all of the with no new direction in economic policy, negative interest rates, and keeping this debt bubble intact seems to be the mantra coming from Canberra.
Yeah, and I just want to underscore again, the power of the people is really important here, right? We need to continue to, make sure that Canberra knows that we're not necessarily comfortable with what's going on, and the petitions and the emails and all of those things. They really do count, and I think in this current environment they're probably ever more important. So people, shouldn't be discouraged. People should actually understand that we have an opportunity to influence and shape some of the things that are going on, and that takes a lot of time, energy, and effort, not just at a point in time, but over a long period of time. And in a way, that's in the interest of the people, and it's the power of the people, isn't it, John?
Absolutely.
Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of the people. We'll see you next time.